I am one of your lecturer, Mr. J Shisinga. As you all know, the name of the module is Colonial / Post-Colonial Literature. Okay, before I go any further, I want to take you through the outcomes of the module, because as I was going through your assignments and some of your exam, I've noticed that most of you are treating this module like the normal literature module, but there is a catch here, and that catch is this module, when you're working through our texts, make sure that you interpret them through colonial and post-colonial literature. What does this mean? This means that as you are looking into whatever text that we're going to prescribe to, for example, here you do poetry, you do drama, you do novel. So you make sure that as you're reading them, for example, in a post-colonial literature or colonial, one will not expect to read about Shakespeare, for example, but here we expect you to read about what your Tsitsi Dangaremba, we expect you to read about literature that addresses those issues that were happening in countries which were once colonized and which are now trying to do what? To move away from colonialism. That's why the name post-colonial. Post simple means after, and then colonial is during that time. For example, if you take this module and you put it in our South African context, this will simply means that the text that you're going to read the text when it comes to colonial, those texts that were written during apartheid. That is if you want to confine it to our South African context. It means where it's written colonial, you will replace colonial with apartheid, and then stroke after that you're going to say after apartheid literature. That's where now post-colonial comes in. But we decided to call it colonial and post-colonial because there are texts that are written by African writers who are not based in South Africa. For example, if you look at your novel, you read about Tsitsi Dangaremba's nervous condition, and you know that Tsitsi Dangaremba is from Zimbabwe. And then when you go into your short story or your drama, you read the drama that is written by an African-American based author. You see now, that's why we say it's what is post-colonial and colonial literature. So in this module, you're expected to do 3 different genres. You have your poetry, you have the fiction, which is your novel, and your short story. So at the end of the module, you need to be able to explain in speech and also in writing how the politics of representation shaped this literature. And then you also need to be, when you're dealing with this module, because I told you that you need to differentiate it from the normal literature module, there are certain key concepts that you need to look into. They are called a post-colonial literary theories, meaning that as you are reading whatever material you're reading, you need to look at it within that post-colonial literary theory. And then when you are writing your assignments, you are expected to show an understanding of those concepts as they are given in a context. When I talk of post-colonial literary theory, there are certain jargon that I use there. For example, you are expected to know what is colonialism, what is post-colonialism, what is neo-colonialism, stereotype, urbanization, modernity, race, feminism, patriarchy, identity, and the likes. The list goes on and goes on. So what I want us to look into now is the issue of representation. Representation, you need to understand that as an author, when an author decided to write, let's say we look into poetry, for example, the language that poets use is different from the language that is used by the normal person. What they do is they use what we call figure of speech. They make sure that their writing or their language is so embedded with figures of speech to such an extent that one is able to differentiate between poem and novel. If you look at the manner in which the language is used between the two, you're going to see, for example, poetry is going to be congested by figures of speech. Here we're talking about simile, metaphors, and the likes. But when you look into novel, it's the language that is used in novel is a congested language. That's why you find that they explain, they write maybe a whole lot of pages. But you look into poetry, you have only quite few lines. But in those few lines, the author has a particular message that he or she wants to pass across. So this is what I want you to do. Every time when you look at whatever literature, let's say it's a poem, you need to make sure that as you're reading that poem, look at how the author is talking about colonialism, or how the author is talking about post-colonialism in that particular literature. That's why when we ask you in your exam or your assignment, we do not ask you something that is just out there for everyone to see. We want you that as you're reading this poem by so and so, it makes you think, it makes you imagine that, oh, this person was actually talking about the state, or the person was either questioning the status quo, or the person was affirming the status quo, or the person, for example, in Tsitsi Dangaramba's novel, you're going to see that, oh, okay, you know what, she's actually talking about patriarchy that was happening in Rhodesia, that is known now as Zimbabwe. Then she uses what? She uses characters. Those characters, for example, you have your Babamkuru, you have the mother in the house and the likes. You see, so he uses those characters to do what? To talk about patriarchy that was happening during what? Colonialism in Rhodesia, which is now known as Zimbabwe. So that's what we mean when we say you need to look at this module using the lens of colonial and post-colonial. So what I'm going to do now is to talk about poetry. I want to give you just a little highlight on what to look for when you are studying poetry, since it's going to be part of your exam. In your exam, I think you're going to choose between the three genres, your poetry, your novel, and the play. You're going to choose. But what I want to do now is going to show you some pointers as to when, for example, if you are given a poem, before you do whatever you need to do, you need to read that poem 2 times at least. As you're reading it like that, you're going to realize that some words, as you're reading, they are going to stuck in your brain. Those are the words that when you now go back to look at the questions, they're going to remain in your mind. So what I want you to know is, first thing you must know that when you look into poetry, the manner in which the author will have used the language, he or she is going to use that language to address issues that happened or that are happening. When I talk about happening, it means this is what in post-colonial. When I talk of issues that happened, now it will be in what? In colonialism. First, you need to look at the heading of that particular poem. Headings are very important in poetry. It's not all the time, but most of the time, poets tend to give headings that are related to the content of the poem. Hear me well. Not all the time, but majority of them, you find that the heading addresses or relates to what one is going to read in the body of the poem. And then again, when you're done looking at the headings, you also need to look at the author. By looking at the author, I mean you need to look at his or her biography. Some authors, especially those who are dealing with colonial texts, they tend to write or to show in their writing the manner in which they were raised. For example, if you look at authors such as Dennis Brutus, you can tell that no man, this guy has been influenced by the context of South African upbringing, because in his writing you can tell that it shows that, okay, during the time he was growing, these are the things that he was experiencing daily. So if you look at his poetry, you tend to realize that, oh, you know what, his poetry tend to show a little bit of reality of what he did. That's now what his poems differ from those who are writing fictional poetry. For example, somebody who can decide to praise grass, somebody who can decide to praise items and things like that. He writes about reality of how South Africa was and the things like that. Number 3, all the time make sure that you look at figures of speech, because poets use figures of speech in their language to hide. By hiding, I simply mean they don't show exactly, you don't read, they don't put everything. Isn't it, I told you when I started that the language that is used in poetry differs from the language in the novel. With novels, they tend to write everything because they have enough pages, they have enough space. But in poetry, you sometimes find that that particular poem, it only has 14 lines, and then in those 14 lines he or she has to try to address issues that he or she wants to talk about. So what they do is they use figures of speech to address those particular issues. And then there are certain issues that I would like you to also check is when you look into poetry, you started with the heading, you look into the author, and then you look into the figures of speech that are used. You also need to look into the plot or the setting. Most of the time, a setting is important because it is in that setting that will tell you, that will show you that, okay, this person is talking about Johannesburg, for example, issues that were happening in Johannesburg during that particular apartheid period. And then he or she will try to show certain highlights. For example, like in a poem called City Johannesburg, one could tell that the author there, Wali Mungani was talking about Johannesburg, because you could tell that when he was talking about the neon lights, he was talking about the train, he was talking about firms, he was talking about people who were moving towards their part of work and things like that. So the setting is also important. And then also you need to look into the kind of language that is used, the kind of verbs. Why would this author choose to use this particular verb? Why? And then that's how you tend to do what? To be able to analyze poetry. Because if you look at it just by mere lines without having a lens, chances are you might miss it. That's why we don't want you to look at poetry and interpret it in the same way as a student who's doing, for example, Western literature. There, they are using a different lens, but you are using what? A colonial and post-colonial lens. I think now we can move to novels. Yes, in the drama, yeah. When we look into drama, remember, I told you that in this module, you're studying 3 genres. Actually, there should be 4 because there's also a play, right? So, we've already done poetry where I told you things that to look out for. And then also, before I forget, when I was going through your poems, those of you who chose to write about poetry, I've realized that most of you are not researching. Remember, you are not the only person who read or who's studying those poems. There are certain scholars who have already critiqued those particular poems. So it's always important that you go an extra mile by doing what? By the reading, trying to see what the critics have written about that particular poem or that particular poet. In that way, you tend to see things that you would have missed, because no 2 people can study one poem and interpret it the same. That's why we say what? Literature is creative. 2 people can look at one poem, but then both of them come out with different interpretation. What is important is that whatever you are interpreting, always show the text, that according to line 1, 2, 3, 4. What makes me say here Wali Mungani Sirot is talking about Johannesburg is because in line 3 it talks about City Johannesburg, City Joburg, and I know that Joburg, it's a shortcut for Johannesburg, you see. And then you're also able to do what? You must, because 2 people can read one poem, interpret differently. So you must show me where you're getting that particular interpretation. Okay, now we'll look into drama. And then the drama that you guys are doing, it's one that is written by Lorraine Hansberry. She was chosen, though she's in the United States of America, but what she was writing there were issues that were happening or that affected colonial period, that occurred during the colonial period. And the other thing is that her biography, Lorraine Hansberry, it's a black African American. You see, so she's part of this. She qualifies to be here simple because she's what? First, she's an American person but with an African descent. Number two, she's addressing issues that occurred during what? Colonial and post-colonial period, and the setting within which she was writing A Raisin in the Sun. She addresses issues that also affected what? Black people. Each of these genres is different from one another, also from the manner in which language is used. For example, drama is different from poetry and fiction because in drama you get a dialogue or speech form that is characterized by tone and language and the structure. That's why you look into this drama, we have different characters. So those characters are involved in a dialogue, and it is through that dialogue that Hansberry is explaining to us issues that the black African American were going through during that period of colonial period. Yes, Raisin in the Sun, it is an example of African American literature which was produced, as I've already said, in US, but it's written by a person with an African descent. Of course, it is rich in language and commentary, and it evaluates identities that were happening in America during that time. And one of the themes in the Raisin in the Sun is racism. Because if you look, when you read through this drama, you're going to realize that this family was involved in racism when they wanted to go live in a suburban area. And then even though they had enough money to can afford that lifestyle, but somehow they wanted them to stop because of their skin, simply because they were black. They were not allowed to go there, even though at the end they ended up going, but the process that they have to go through in order to meet that, it was difficult for them. This is important also in your drama. The heading or title says a lot. If you look, for example, a raisin, and here we are told a raisin in the sun. First, there is an irony there. If you take a raisin and you put it in the sun, what's going to happen to it? It's going to dry up and die, or dry up, whatever. So here, it's very important to try and ask yourself, what made Hansberry to name this drama A Raisin in the Sun? Because you need to try to picture it. Picture a raisin in the sun, for example. Does it shrivel up? Does it dry up quickly? Lose its juicy? Does it smell like a rotten food? Does it burst open? Why will it be in the sun? And what color is it? So you know, these are the things that when you deal with literature, you need to ask yourself. Always try to do what? To interrogate the text. Ask yourself. That's why I always say in literature, there's no right nor wrong answer. It depends on how well you support your answer. Because remember, literature is a creative work. And in creativity, you can create whatever you want as long as you have a reason for creating it and you know what its work is going to be. Representations is very important. Because this whole drama is all about dreams. First, there's a dream that the mother have. There's a dream that the son Walter has. There's a dream that the daughter Benita has. And then there's a dream that Walter's wife has. So in this drama, you find 4 characters which all of them want their dream to come true. For example, the brother, his dream was that when the check that his the late father left clears, he should get an opportunity to do what? To go open a tavern, because he feels he can make more money to be able to raise the family. And then when you look at the mother, Lina Younger Mama, her dream was that when that check of my husband arrive, I need to use that money to buy a house so that my whole family can live into. And then when you look at the dream that her daughter Benita has, her dream was to become a doctor. And she was saying, when that check clears, Mama must be able to do what? To take that money and invest some of it into my study so I can become a doctor. You see now, we're talking about dreams. However, in this drama, there is also dreams is one of the themes, and then there is also patriarchy. Patriarchy is just to sum it, patriarchy is when we deal with patriarchy, we're dealing with issues where men are saying what women should do and what men should do. There's that distinction where, for example, somebody who's very patriarchal, they will tell you that a woman belongs in the kitchen. And then if you look into this drama and the Raising in the Sun, Walter Lee was patriarchal towards Benita, because at some point you question her to say, where have you seen a woman wanting to become a doctor? That career is meant for men. All you have to do, you Benita, is to become a woman and be married, and it ends there. You see, it was patriarchal towards her. So also patriarchy, it's another theme in this novel, in this drama. And then also issue of racism, it's also a theme in this drama, because when the money clears, Lina Younger Mama, she wanted to take the money so she can move her family into a suburban area. But then when she got into that suburban area, she found that the committee that is there did not want them to do what? To move in that area, because they assumed that simple because they're being black, first they don't have enough money, or that they're going to come and cause what? Trouble in that place. And then the protagonist in the novel, it's Walter Lee, because most of the time this whole drama involves around him. Because if you look at the manner in which it starts with him when the novel starts. He's in the shower, he's running towards the shower, and then as the climax goes on, he gets a guy who wanted him to invest the money in order for them to do what? To buy the license for the liquor. But then it never happened. The person ends up doing what? Running with the money. And then towards the end, we find that he does what? He changes from his behavior, where he ended up doing what? Agreeing with his mother, where he takes the whole family into the suburban area. And then that's where the plot ends. Yes, also, when you are reading this drama, yes, for those of you who did not manage to get the book, you can also go to YouTube. You can find the movie about this drama. That's very interesting. There's also a movie that is acted towards this book, so you can get it there. Issue of symbols is very important, because in this drama we get the symbols such as objects, the characters, figures, colors used to represent the abstract or the concept. For example, there's a phrase that reads, eat your eggs. This phrase appears early in the play as an instruction from Ruth to Walter to quiet him. Remember, Ruth was his wife. Walter then employs the phrase to illustrate how women keep men from achieving their goals. You see now, remember what I said to you. Patriarchy involves in both ways. Men tend to say they know what women should do, and also women tend to do what? To say we know what men should do. For example, here, the phrase eat your eggs, it's used in both ways. First, there's Ruth, who's Walter's wife, where she tells him that when he was talking and then she feels that what he was saying was not making sense to her, she told him to do what? please shut up and eat your eggs. And then as the play goes on, Walter also used that towards his son, where he shows that, you know what, this phrase appears early in the play as an instruction from Ruth to Walter to quiet him. Walter then employs the phrase to illustrate how women keep men from achieving their goals. Every time a man gets excited about something, he claims, a woman tries to temper his enthusiasm by telling him to eat his eggs. Being quiet and eating one's eggs represent an acceptance of the adversity that Walter keeps him from achieving his dream. And he argues that she should be more supportive of him. The eggs, and then there's also another symbol, the plant. Remember, when Mama Lee moves into the new house, she had a plant. That plant also represents something. The most overt symbol in the play, it's Mama's plant, which represents both her care and her dream for her family. In her first appearance on stage, she moves directly towards the plant to take care of it. She confesses that the plant never gets enough light or water, but she takes pride in how it nevertheless flourishes under her care. Her care for a plant is similar to her care for her children, unconditional and unending despite a less than perfect environment for growth. The yard with her plant, she practices her gardening skills. Her success with the plant helps her believe that she will be successful as a gardener. Her persistence and dedication to the plant fosters her hope that her dream may come true. Now we will look into the third genre, which is novel. And then the novel that you guys are studying is one written by a Zimbabwean-born artist called Tsitsi Dangaremba. Those of you who are into social media, you should Google her. You'll find her. She's there, and she's a sweet lady. She can interact with you if you have any question, because I was able to talk to her as well. And then also there's recent issues that happened in Zimbabwe this year, where she was arrested together with others because they were demonstrating towards gender-related issues in Zimbabwe and corruptions and the like. So she is the relevant person to study in this context. They are in this one, because it's a big novel, I will just quickly skim through some of the themes that one gets when one reads this novel. For example, there is issues of gender inequality and the pervasiveness of it. The protagonist here, we have Tambu, who was born in the faces of the disadvantage in the then Rhodesia, which is now called Zimbabwe. And this is what I've noticed. Most of you keep writing Zimbabwe. At some point, you will be marked wrong, because in the whole novel, the novel speaks of Rhodesia. So what you need to do is you need to write first Rhodesia, and then maybe you open brackets, and then you say that from now onwards it will be addressed as Zimbabwe, just so that you're able to show that what you're talking about, though this novel was written during the colonial period, but now we can still show the relativeness of it in the post-colonial Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, because the issue of gender still occur now even in the current Zimbabwe. And then also in the novel, we also need to say something about the influence of colonialism, because remember that Tambu's experience in a Western style of education, right? That setting and the mission, remember she's been into the mission school. Both of these do what? Provide some representation and the privilege, opportunities and enlightenment despite the things that they went through. Because if you look into this novel, you are dealing with two settings. You're dealing with the settings in Rhodesia, and then you're dealing with the settings that occur where in England, where her cousins studied. Can we please move on? And also the theme of tradition versus progress. Remember, Tambu's family, their whole life, they remained where? They remained in Rhodesia. They never left. But then if you look into Babamkuru, Babamkuru, who is a brother to Tambu's father, he did what? He was the one who was looked in the progressive manner, because he and his wife, they managed to get their masters way in England, and also their kids did what? They studied in the Western way. That's what we mean when we say there's an theme of tradition versus progress. And then also there's an issue of emancipation. By emancipation, we simply mean that especially when it comes to women, right? Emancipation is a term that appears again in the nervous conditions. Usually the term is associated with being released from slavery, or with a country finally freeing itself from the colonial powers that once controlled it. This concept figure into the broader scope of the novel as Rhodesia's citizens struggle to amass and assert their identity as people while still under the British control. When the term emancipation is applied to Tambu and the woman in her extended family, it takes on a newer and richer associations. Tambu sees herself as a gradual process of being freed of the limitations that have previously besetted her. When she first leaves for the mission school, she sees the move as a temporary emancipation. Her growing knowledge and evolving perceptions are a form of emancipation from her old ways of thinking. By the end of the novel, emancipation becomes more than simply a release from a poverty or restriction. Emancipation is equated with freedom and the persuasion and the personal liberty. And then of course there's issue of dual perspectives and multiple interpretation, which appear throughout the novel. When Babamkoro finds Lucia a job of cooking at the mission, Tambu is in awe as of her uncle's power and generosity, viewing it as a selfless act of kindness. Nyasha, however, believes there is nothing heroic in her father's gesture, and that in assisting his sister-in-law is merely fulfilling his duty as the head of the family. You see, now it also takes us back to that progress versus tradition that we spoke about. So there are also issues of patriarchy here. For example, Tambu feels that what Babamkuru is doing, it's a show of selfless act, whereas Babamkuru's daughter Nyasha, she sees it as what a man should do in a family. So there is that patriarchy. So that's why most of the themes that are occurring in this module, they tend to occur in all the texts that you are studying. So that's why I'm saying when you read this text, you need to wear that scope of colonial vis-a-vis post-colonial. And of course, there's issue of symbols, issue of Tambu's garden, where she ended up doing a garden in order for her to be able to pay for her school fees. That also shows symbol that is used in here. And of course, the mission itself. For Tambu, the mission stands as a bright and a shining beacon, the repository of all her hopes and ambition. It represents a portal to a new world and a turning away from the enslaving poverty that has marked Tambu's past. The mission is an escape and an oasis, a whitewashed world where refinement and sophistication are the rule. It is also an exciting retreat for Tambu, where she is exposed to new ideas and likes. And of course, the symbol of the ox. In the family's lengthy holiday celebration, the ox represents the opulence and the status Babamkuru and his family have achieved. Meat is a rare commodity. It's an infrequent treat for most families, and Tambu's parents and the rest of the extended clan willingly partake of the ox. At the same time, they secretly resent such an outstanding display of wealth, since the ox is a symbol of a great gulf that exist between the educated branch of the family and those who have been left behind to struggle. My guru closes regulates the consumption of the ox and parcels out the meat over the several days of the family's gathering. Eventually, the meat starts to go bad, and the other women chide my guru for the poor judgment on overly strict control of its distribution. At the point of the ox suggests my guru's shortcomings and how, in the eyes of the others, her education and comfortable life have made her an effective provider. Yes, now we look at the plot, right? The protagonist, obvious, is Tambu. That's why if you look, most of your questions are going to center around Tambu, because you tend to find that she is the one who tend to interact with each and every character in the book. And of course, there is also major conflict. Tambu's struggle against the poverty and lack of opportunity that mark her world at the homestead. Once at the mission school, she is impressed by the societal bias against women and sacrifices she must make in order to please her uncle and fulfill his expectations of her. And then the rising action after Nemo dies. Remember, Nemo was Tambu's brother. After Nemo dies, Tambu is offered his place at the mission school. Baba Mkuru expects more and more influence on the family's actions and decisions, eventually declaring that Tambu's parents must be formally married in a Christian ceremony. And then the climax, Tambu resists her uncles in refusing to attend her parents' wedding. My guru leaves her husband after realizing she is not taken seriously as a viable economic force in the family. And then the falling action is Tambu is punished and realizes she must take control of her own destiny and make her own way, winning a scholarship to the convent school. And then Nyasha and Chido returning from England, having lost most of all their native language, the Shona. It foreshadows the same linguistic dislocation that occurs to Nemo than to Tambu. Nemo's growing dislike of returning home for vacations foreshadows the growing gulf that develops for Tambu between life at the mission school and life at the homestead. As I conclude, when your exam comes, please at all the time make sure that you read instructions carefully, and most of you keep on asking about the length of your assignments or the length of your essays. The length is determined by the question. For example, if you are writing out of 100, I at least expect you to give me at least the minimum of 2.5 pages going upwards. Hear me well, I'm not saying the content does not matter. The content matters, but for 100 marks, I will expect you to have responded to the question with a minimum of at least 2.5 pages going forward. And at all time, most of you are submitting works to us without putting references. You are in breach when you do that, because you're doing what is known as plagiarism. At some point, you will be given 0 because you tend to take ideas or opinions that are not yours and present them to us as if they are your own. The only way for me to be able to tell that what I'm reading now is a student work, I will at least have to see in-text referencing or in-text citation. In-text citation can be done in 2 ways. First, it can be done in the beginning of the paragraph where you say, according to Shisinga 2020, page 4, he says when a student writes an assignment, the student must use bibliography, the student must show an in-text citation. You close it. Or you can put in-text citation at the end of the paragraph where you simply open bracket, you write Shisinga hyphen 2020, page 14, and then you close. You only do this when you have paraphrased, meaning that you're going to show that in this paragraph, some of the information that is used here came from Shisinga. But when you use it in the beginning, when you say according to, I expect you to put quotation marks where you're going to put those words that the particular speaker you are quoting have said. That's why you say according to Shisinga, comma, open inverted commas, says this and this and this, and then you close, full stop. And then I expect you to do what? To show what you understand but what Shisinga has said. Because at the end, most of your assignment, most of what you're submitting, it's simple quotation of whole lot without your idea. That's why most of you find like comments that we write is, I am unable to find your voice, meaning that you just go and take what people are saying and you're not interpreting it. At the end, I want to see what is it that you as a student you have learned after you read what people are saying about a particular concept. Thank you, and I wish you all the best in your exam.